Picture yourself standing beside a man that everyone around you insists you should trust. The wedding meal has been cleared away. Guests are still laughing somewhere behind you. Horses stand tied in the yard beyond the lantern light. People catch your eye and smile. They tell you how blessed you are, how fortunate, how proud your family must be feeling in this moment. And yet, beneath the white prayer covering pinned carefully to your hair, something inside you is signaling that something is wrong. Not nervous, not uncertain, wrong. You have spent months persuading yourself that the feeling would dissolve on its own. You told yourself it was simply nerves, a failure of faith, the ordinary anxiety of a young woman about to begin a new life. But now your wedding night has arrived and there is no room left in which to hide from what you know. And then he says something. A single sentence, a handful of words. And in the space of a breath you understand that the man you married is not the man anyone believed him to be, including you. That was the night I left. I spent nearly 24 years inside the Old Order Amish world, in a conservative community in Pennsylvania. I was born into a family that held deep convictions about church authority, the obligations of family, and obedience to God. My parents were trusted and respected members of our district. We were not people of wealth, but we were known as dependable, as people who honored the rules and did not draw unnecessary attention. I attended Amish school. I traveled by buggy. I dressed plain. I prepared for baptism and church membership exactly as everyone expected me to. For most of my life, I believed I understood the people who surrounded me. I believed I understood the man I married. I was wrong on both counts. What came to light on my wedding night revealed a secret that had been buried for years, and once I had seen it, it was impossible to unsee. To understand why I walked out, you first need to understand how marriage functions in many Amish communities. It is not simply an agreement between two individuals. It is a community matter in the fullest sense. Families observe. Church leaders observe. Reputation carries enormous weight. Character carries weight. Obedience carries weight. Most young people begin courting after baptism, and while the courtship itself is usually kept private by the standards of the outside world, everyone eventually learns who is keeping company with whom. Marriage is understood to be a lifelong commitment, and that understanding is not whispered or implied. It is stated clearly and repeated often. The Ordnung does not govern every detail of how two people court, but the standards of the community shape nearly every choice that is made along the way. I accepted that. Most of us did. By the time a wedding takes place, there is an assumption held by everyone present that the couple has come to know each other well. Looking back now, I think what most of us mistake for knowledge is really only familiarity. I knew what David looked like. I knew how he moved through his work. I knew what other people said about him. I did not know who he actually was. That distinction rewrote my entire life. I first met David when I was 19. He was quiet and polite and steady, exactly the kind of man that older church members held up as an example. He came from a family that was well regarded in the district. His father had served as a minister. His mother was known for arriving at a neighbor's door during hard times without being asked. Everything about him read as trustworthy. When we began courting, our conversations were careful and contained. That was not unusual. Neither of us spoke openly about fears or private doubts. Most Amish couples do not spend years mapping out every interior corner of their lives before standing at the altar. There is a widespread assumption that shared belief is sufficient common ground. I believed that too. For nearly 3 years, our relationship moved forward precisely as expected, through church services and family visits and Sunday evenings and community gatherings. Nothing appeared out of place. If there were warning signs within reach, I did not reach for them. There were times when David would disappear for long stretches without much explanation. He always produced a reason. Helping someone with something, working somewhere, running an errand. The explanations were plausible enough. I never pressed further. Pressing felt disloyal, and disloyalty was not something I had been raised to consider an option. The engagement came in late autumn when I was 23, with the wedding set for the following November. Everyone celebrated. My mother wept quietly when I told her. My father shook David's hand. The bishop offered his congratulations. What I remember most from that day is not joy, but relief. At the time, I interpreted that as maturity, as the settled feeling of a woman who has made a sound decision. Now I understand it differently. Some part of me was trying to communicate something I did not yet have the language to receive. The months before the wedding dissolved into an unbroken rush of preparation, of sewing and cooking and visits to relatives and arrangements that needed to be made. When people asked whether I was excited, I always smiled and said yes. Inside, I was living with a feeling I could not identify, a low and constant pressure, a quiet alarm that grew louder the closer the wedding came. And yet I kept moving forward, because stopping would have meant asking questions, and questions are difficult inside a community built on settled certainty. The wedding day arrived cold and clear. I was awake before the sun. My stomach had been tight since the night before, and I barely managed breakfast. Women filled the house before dawn, voices moving from room to room, dresses rustling, doors opening and closing. Everyone around me seemed purposeful. Everyone seemed certain. I felt like the only person who was neither. By the afternoon, the ceremony was finished. Hours of preaching, hours of standing, hours of holding my face in the right expression. The day felt endless, and yet somehow disappeared quickly. As evening settled and the last guests departed, the noise fell away, the celebration fell away, and for the first time all day, David and I found ourselves alone together. That was when the truth began to move toward the surface. The house had gone quiet. There were no more visitors, no relatives calling out from across the room, no church members arriving with one final congratulations, just the two of us. I was standing near the kitchen table gathering plates that had been left after supper. My feet ached from hours of standing. My head felt weighted with exhaustion. Outside, a November wind was pressing against the windows. Inside, everything felt unusually still. David had stepped outside a few minutes earlier, said he needed some air. I did not think much of it. The entire day had been overwhelming for both of us. When he came back in, something in him had shifted. He was not nervous or relieved or tender the way I might have expected. He was distracted in a way that felt different, watchful, looking toward the window, checking the darkness, listening. I asked him if something was wrong. He smiled and looked away quickly. "Just tired," he said. I wanted to accept that. The feeling that had lived in me for months returned instead, sharper than before. A little while later he moved into another room. The door did not pull fully closed behind him. I was not listening for anything. I was not searching for anything. And then I heard his voice, soft and careful, shaped differently than I had ever heard it. For a moment I thought he was speaking to himself. Then I understood he was speaking to someone else. I moved closer without making a decision to do so. One step, then another. The words I caught did not immediately arrange themselves into sense. I heard him say a name I did not recognize. Then he laughed, a quiet and nervous laugh, the kind that comes from fear rather than amusement. A woman's voice answered him. I went still. There was a telephone in the room, which was not entirely unusual, as some Amish homes had access to community phones or devices kept in nearby structures. But what the woman said next was not ordinary. She asked when he planned to leave. Leave. The word landed differently from all the others. Leave where? David lowered his voice. I could not hear every word, only pieces. The pieces were enough. I can't stay. I've waited long enough. Soon. And then something else. Something that sent a cold drop through the center of my chest. The woman called him Michael. Not David. Michael. For a moment I searched for another explanation. Perhaps I had misheard. Perhaps exhaustion had bent the word into something it was not. But then he answered her without correcting her, without any pause at all, as though Michael were simply his name. I went back to the kitchen before he could see me. My hands were trembling. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. Everyone I reached for felt thinner than the last. About 20 minutes later he came back and sat at the table. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us stretched until I finally broke it with the only question I had. Who is Michael? The color left his face. I remember watching it go. One question, one reaction, and suddenly I knew not everything, but enough. He said nothing for several seconds. The clock on the wall was very loud. Somewhere outside a horse shifted in the dark. Then he asked me how much I had heard. Not whether I had heard correctly. How much I had heard. something tightened in my chest. I sat down and fixed my eyes on the grain of the wood on the table because looking directly at him felt beyond what I could manage. "What is happening?" I asked. His answer came in slow pieces, each one reluctant, as though the sentences themselves were causing him pain. Years before we met, he had spent time working near communities outside the Amish world, far more time than anyone around him had understood. He had built relationships beyond the fence. He had begun living two lives that did not touch each other. One inside the community, another entirely outside it. Different clothing, different companions, different habits, a different name. Michael was the name that belonged to that other life. I listened without speaking. The room felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The exhaustion I had been carrying all day was gone. In its place was something else entirely. And then came the piece that made everything shift beneath me. The woman on the telephone was not a friend. She was not someone he worked with. She was a person he had been involved with for years, including most of the time we had spent courting, including our engagement, including the weeks that had led directly to our wedding. I felt the numbness before I felt anything else. Not anger, not yet, just a strange hollowing out. The person sitting across the table from me had become someone I did not recognize, a stranger occupying the face of a man I thought I had known. I asked him why he had married me. His answer is among the hardest things I have ever had to hold. He said he believed that marrying me would resolve the problem. He thought that if he committed fully to his life inside the community, the other life would simply lose its hold on him. He thought the wedding would repair something in him. Instead, it had exposed everything. I looked at my wedding dress hanging nearby. Only hours before, people had gathered to celebrate what we were beginning. Now I was learning that what we were beginning had been built on something concealed from me for years. The pressure in my chest became almost more than I could carry. I stood up and walked to the window and looked out into the dark. Every doubt I had set aside over the preceding months returned to me at once, and for the first time I understood what they had been trying to do. They had been trying to protect me. David kept talking, explaining, apologizing, rearranging the words into different shapes. They blurred together. One thought repeated itself clearly beneath all of it. I cannot stay. I cannot stay. I cannot stay. Then he told me something that removed the last question from the room. The woman was expecting him to come to her within days. Part of him still intended to go. In that moment I understood that my marriage had lasted only a few hours. Everything before that evening had been a promise. Everything from this moment forward was real. I walked to the bedroom and picked up a small bag and began placing my things inside. That was when David understood what I was doing, and the way he responded revealed something even more painful than the secret itself. He watched me fold each item and place it in the bag. He seemed confused at first, as though he had been bracing for tears or raised voices or a long negotiation. I folded carefully, one piece at a time. The room was strangely calm. My hands were steady. Inside, I felt hollowed out completely. He started to say a name and stopped himself. He said Naomi, but something else had almost come out first. The slip lasted less than a second. I noticed it anyway. One more crack in the surface, one more reminder that the man standing in front of me was not fully present in the life we had just stepped into. I looked at him. For the first time that evening, I saw fear move across his face. Not the fear of losing me, the fear of what would follow once other people learned what had happened. Please stay until morning, he said. Just until morning. I have held those words carefully ever since, not because they were cruel, but because of what they made visible. The guests had gone home only hours before. If word spread that the bride had left during her wedding night, the talking would begin immediately. He needed time to construct an explanation, time to protect himself from what was coming. I set the bag down on the floor and asked him one question. Did you ever love me? The silence that answered me went on for a long time. He looked away. That was enough. Something moved through me, cold and quiet and final. Somewhere inside, a door closed. I picked up the bag and walked to the front door and went out. The night air came at my face immediately. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. Frost lay across the ground in patches. The sky was completely clear, and stars stretched across the dark in every direction. I remember every detail of it. Trauma preserves things with a precision that ordinary memory never manages. The road to my parents' house was nearly 2 miles. On any other night, I would have taken the buggy. That night, I walked alone, still wearing parts of my wedding clothing. The gravel shifted under my shoes. My breath came out in clouds. I kept waiting to hear footsteps behind me. I never did. Halfway there, I stopped beside a fence. The full weight of what had happened finally settled over me. Only that morning I had been preparing to begin a marriage. Now I was making my way home as a bride without a husband. I stood there for several minutes, not weeping, not speaking, simply trying to place what had happened inside some framework that made sense. The world felt like it had been slightly rearranged while I wasn't watching. When I reached my parents' house, every light was out. It was past midnight. I knocked once, then again. A few moments later, my father opened the door. His face changed the instant he saw me. He looked at the bag. He looked at my clothing. He looked at me. He knew immediately that something had gone badly wrong. My mother appeared behind him. Neither of them asked questions right away. They simply brought me inside. The kitchen was warm. A lantern was burning on the table. I sat down, and for several minutes no one spoke. Then my father quietly asked what had happened. I told them everything, every detail, every word, the hidden identity, the telephone call, the woman waiting outside the community, the years of living two separate lives. The room went completely silent. My mother lowered her eyes. My father stared at the table without moving. Neither of them interrupted. When I finished, my father leaned back slowly and said something I had not expected. He said he had been afraid of something like this. I looked up immediately. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated, and then he told me something he had never told me before. Years earlier, when David was younger, rumors had moved quietly through the community. Nothing confirmed, nothing specific, only questions and whispered concerns about unusual absences and connections that seemed to reach beyond the Amish world. The concerns had never become public. The evidence had never been solid enough to hold. Eventually, the rumors faded, and people moved on. My father had hoped they were without foundation. Standing in that warm kitchen in the middle of the night, he understood that they were not. If any of this has reached something in you, pass it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you have carried something like this yourself, leave your story below. What you lived through belongs to you. It always has.